Very well. Let this abomination unto the Lord begin.
Welcome to Nerd Stories and Other Geeky Rants, brought to you by 3D or 2D.com.
Engage.
It's a negative force coming in on a positive force because it's a third dimension, right? And for it to solidify or to crystallize, it has to have both elements.
This is becoming a speech.
You're the captain, sir. You're entitled.
Not entitled to ramble on about something everyone knows.
You think your Commodore 64 is really neato? What kind of chip you got in there, a Dorito?
Let the nerds take over!
Hello. This is Adolf Vega from 3D or 2D.com, and this is another episode of Nerd Stories. This episode is actually going to be all about podcasting itself. So it's kind of a meta podcast about podcasting. There's a few things. I just wanted, because today, September 30th, 2015, is International Podcast Day. I guess it's just awareness of this art form, and some people may not think this is an art form. Why is this an art form? We're just talking to a microphone. What's the big deal? Anyone could do that. It's like, well, yes and no. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to get the right software. You know, I'm using Audio Hijack Pro, if you care. And I also edit with Fission, which is a companion of Audio Hijack Pro, which is done by Meba. Anywho, I just use my Mac for this, and I just have a basic set of headset, which I actually stole from a previous employer, which I won't mention which employer. But anywho, so I'm just using basic stuff here, but trying to edit in music and see what topics are best to cover, and trying to scrub through and make sure that pitches aren't going too high or too low. You know, that it takes a lot of effort, you know, and trying to produce it and put it up and sound okay, because sometimes things could sound weird when you actually record it and sound fine when you're hearing it, and vice versa. So, yeah, that's just kind of some of the. Sometimes it takes hours to clean up a podcast. Sometimes it could take 10 minutes. It just depends. You know, sometimes it may just take 10 minutes just to save a podcast, because the files could get really big and complicated. And of course, putting it on the website and having everything on there so everything works. But I don't think you guys really care about that. I don't know. This is more about just how I got into it, where my brother has always been ahead of the curve with technology, and he taught me how to use a computer, basically. I mean, he had a Mac, and I just kind of played with it, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. And then I pretty much learned Windows because I knew how to use a Mac. Anywho, he told me one time we were driving somewhere, and I was in the back seat, and he was listening to a program. And I was like, what are you listening to? It's like, I never heard this on the radio before. It's like, oh, it's not a radio. It's a podcast. It's like, huh? What is that? It's like, see my iPod. It's like, yeah. It's like, well, people record themselves talking and put it on the air, so you could actually listen to it. And it's like, okay. So what's so special about that? What's how that different from radio? It was like, well, you could pause it. And for the most part, it doesn't have any commercials. At the time, podcasts really didn't have commercials. Now, it's much more popular. Unfortunately, I'm not popular enough to have commercials, because commercials are done by advertisers who think that your podcast is popular enough to deserve advertising money. And if you're a small podcast like myself, like 3D or 2D.com, we're not going to get advertisers. So it's just one of those things where people don't like the ads, but the ads really do help podcasters, because this, for the most part, podcasting is not a paying job. There's some people that make enough money from the ads, to live off podcasting, but I think for the most part, the majority of the people recording them do it because they enjoy doing it, because it's something they want to express how they feel or their ideas or something to that degree. So podcasting, I think it may be in a resurgence. I know Serial was a really big hit recently, which was a PBS NPR thing, which was about like a murder mystery that was originally advertised in This American Life. I never actually heard Serial because I listened to like the first episode and I was like, I don't really care about murder mysteries. I've never really been into that kind of thing. So, my brother had mentioned this and I was like, podcast, that sounds kind of dumb. And the first podcasts that I really did hear were part of IGN. They had Nintendo Voice Chat, and they actually talked about news that wasn't necessarily on the website IGN, which at the time I was following for the Wii coverage and the GameCube coverage, and DS as well. And so the stuff they covered in the podcast, if they did cover it in their website, is just like condensed into an hour or so of listening. And I really enjoyed those podcasts. I thought they were fascinating. And eventually I got my own iPod Nano, and I really started liking it because it was really convenient. I could pause it whenever I want. I could, drive and listen to it, and I don't have to stream it. People don't have a problem streaming it now, but for the most part, streaming is really taxing on battery and or data, and people now have a lot of data and don't care about battery life, but I do care. I don't want to be streaming. I only have a certain cap of data I can use on my phone. So, I started an IGN podcast, and I was like, okay, what else they got? They got Game Scoop, talk about video game stuff. It's like, okay, cool. And it's like, kind of like politics, so let's see about politics. And I found a Washington Week with Gwen Ifill, and thought that was really good. My favorite podcast is Radio for Nintendo, which I think a lot of the things that they've done in their podcast I've emulated and copied, because just how they present themselves and how they try to keep things organized is something that I really like. That's one thing about podcasts, it's just different styles. Some people keep things very organized and tight. Other times people will just ramble on and on. This actually, unfortunately, is a rambling. I do have some ideas here and there, but Nerd Stories is a little bit more free flow. With other podcasts, I typically have a topic that I want to cover and just leave it at that. So, the free flow, inside jokes, that's part of it. Some podcasts, and they can get annoying, and, a lot of laughing, a lot of, music is optional. Sometimes people like to have big intros like I do, or have little intros or no intro. And, some podcasts that don't really introduce what you're talking about before you start talking about it is a big pet peeve of mine. So one of my things on my iPhone, I have 16 gig iPhone 5S, and podcasts are a major part of that. So listening to stuff as I drive to work and back, and it's just something that I now have become accustomed to, where whenever the podcasts take a break for like Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, it's just like, oh, where's my podcasts? And basically replaced radio for me. I do listen to the radio here and there, but it's just a matter of podcasts have less commercials and you can skip them, and that I just know what topics I'm gonna get, so I digest it like I want it. Digest is probably a bad word. I consume it. I consume what I want, and I don't eat what I don't. So, podcasts are like a cafeteria. You pick what you want. If you don't want it, then you don't pick it. And, I always try to keep things up to date and try to keep things fresh. But it's just part of the time it takes to process it, to think of ideas, to put it on paper, organize thoughts, and put it up on the website. So I know right now, recently, podcasts have really tended to go against iTunes and Stitcher, which it was pretty much the big deal, was if you had your podcast on iTunes, and now it's more toward putting it on YouTube and to a lesser extent SoundCloud, which SoundCloud I've experimented with. It's kind of a strange setup because um, yes, you're allowed to put stuff up, but it doesn't necessarily have an RSS feed. And at least the last time I played with it, and you're paying them to upload stuff, where I don't have to pay iTunes anything or Stitcher Radio anything to upload stuff. So I guess there's a bigger audience to do that, but it just seems kind of strange to why I need to pay when I don't have to pay. You know, you know, I don't know. And YouTube, you know, I have a big ugly history with YouTube. I'm gonna get to talk about it one day, but I just, for me, I enjoy listening to people and not have to watch them. And I think having YouTube being a more visual, video, and if you just hear someone talk with no real things on screen, I think that's boring. I know a lot of people are fine with it, but I'm not. If I'm podcasting, I'm usually doing something else at the same time. Podcasting is really great for playing video games, you know, really great for checking Facebook and Twitter and, you know, doing stuff in the background, washing dishes, driving, of course. So I don't, visual podcasts on YouTube, and it doesn't have to be visual, but I just can't imagine sitting down and watching YouTube for an hour and a half or something. And it kind of seems like podcasts have kind of standardized to be about an hour or 45 minutes long, depending on the subject. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but about an hour is where I see things for the most part. Sometimes they'll go over and have 2 hours. It's already up to the podcast's crew how long they want to talk and what topics they have, and if they want to have multiple segments or if just one big segment. If they have multiple segments, they could group it together and edit it together and do what they need to do. But it's just up to the person. So yeah, I've been pretty much podcasting here on 3d2.com for about a year. I used to put stuff on YouTube. My history with YouTube is just very bitter, and I very reluctantly put stuff on the YouTube now. But I may try to expand out, just because I've had 2 different channels that were killed off by YouTube for copyright infringement, when what I did then is what people do now, and they get away with it, and it's perfectly fine now. So I know rules change, but it just seems to, I got the short end of the stick twice, and my accounts were killed off, where now, I had thousands of subscribers, and people really liked what I did, and so I really resent YouTube and what they do. So that's neither here or there. But I guess that's the future of podcasts. I guess having some visuals behind what you're talking about. So yeah, I continue to do podcasts, and it's a big part of my life. I like PBS and NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, Washington Week, like I said before, a lot of video game stuff, a lot of IGN stuff, a Keeping It Real podcast. It just something that you really need to kind of get into. And once you get into it, you kind of look back and like, how did I not do that? And, how do I not have access to all these content for free, relatively speaking? Some podcasts cost money now. Some podcasts you get the micro version, and then if you pay extra $20 a year, then you get the mega edition, and then the mega edition's like an extra hour and it has more content, and So I don't know if I've thought about really doing that. I just know my audience is pretty used to free stuff, and I don't really know how to block and lock stuff up in that fashion. So I don't foresee myself, at least in the near future, really um, doing paywalls for content. I just want to give you content. The main reason, going back to YouTube, I got taken off there and I didn't really have an outlet. And I created a Facebook page and they would have posted videos there. But, podcasts give you that unlimited amount of time that you can just talk about whatever. Where Facebook or YouTube, at the time, they had 10-minute or 15-minute time limitations. Limitations. And podcasts are as limited as you want it to be. So if you want to ramble on for 4 hours, go for it. It's just you have to pay for it because pay for it in the editing when you want to edit it and not just have raw audio. But it's just one of those things where podcasting gives you a lot more freedom than radio because you could cuss if you want to, or you could add sound effects, and you don't have to have station breaks or anything like that. I know there's a recent lawsuit against podcasts for the patent because someone back in the, I forget the whole story, but someone originally patented the idea of broadcasting audio or visual over the internet, and they say that podcasting is their trademark and is their patent, and everyone that makes money off of podcasting needs to get permission to do it from them or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what's really happened with it. I just kind of overheard it a few years ago. So I don't know if that's going to kill it in the tracks or if it's really just noise and, it'll go away. Who knows? People patent junk all the time that are just junk, that really vague things that you don't understand. So, yeah. It's kind of a rambly mess of a podcast. I'm sorry. I think it's kind of interesting. I hope you guys find it interesting. About podcasts on podcast day. So I guess that's podcast squared or 3 times or cubed. So, but yeah, that's going to be my nerd story, another geeky rant about podcasting and the behind the scenes and some of the things that we have to do. I would love to have commercials if anyone is actually listening that is, doing commercials. I have no problem with that. In fact, the entire reason I use Squarespace is because of podcasting. I kept hearing Squarespace ads on podcasts I listened to. I was like, all right, let me try this out. I was like, okay, that works pretty well. So I have a website because of Squarespace because I heard it on a podcast. So it all kind of loops back together again. So there you go. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye for this episode of Geeky Rants and other nerdy stories. Wait, whatever. Bye. Okay, so that's going to conclude the podcast.
Remember to rate this podcast on iTunes and on Stitcher Radio.
Also remember to follow us at 3dor2d.com on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
Please comment on the website and subscribe to us on YouTube.
Finally, I hope you enjoyed the show and thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.